Welcome, everyone. My name is Brad, and I'm actually local, like all of you. I'm in Northern Virginia, in a small area called McLean, and I'm actually still at school today. We all probably were thinking, do I go home first? Do I stay at school for this? So I'm still at school, and I'm excited to be here talking about a topic that's really passionate to me, talking about integrating inquiry and technology to hopefully amplify learning in classrooms. And this is going to be super informal. I'm going to use a bunch of slides as talking points to really hopefully stimulate conversation and discussion. I would love for you to share your thoughts and ideas, knowledge and experience. The smartest person in the room is the room itself. And so I'm hoping I can lean on you all to share some things that you know about on these topics so that we can all benefit and learn and grow together. And since we do have a little time and we have a relatively small group, I'd like to start off just by learning a little bit more about you to hopefully allow me to have our conversations go in a certain direction. I'd like to know just maybe your first name, what your role is, and what location you're in, if you don't mind sharing that in the chat. So I will add those requests in the chat real quick just to get started, just so we know each other a little bit more. So we'll just do name, your role in education, and location. Hi, Denise, welcome. Nice. Hi, Demi, Instructional Technology Integration Supervisor. Nice. Thank you, Thea, or Thea. Distance Learning Program Developer. Ooh, that sounds fun. Hi, Shannon, welcome. Instructional Technology Coach in Frederick County. Nice, Denise, thank you. Annette, Instructional Technology Training Specialist. I love all these titles. They're fun. They're slightly different, but related. And that's in Manassas, okay. Stephanie, High School Science Teacher, working on master's degree from Warren County. Nice, welcome. And the other Stephanie, looks like we have two Stephanies. 5th grade teacher in Warren County. Great. So it looks like we have a little bit of a mix between some leadership in technology, some hands-on learning coaches and supervisors, and some training specialists, and then we also have some teachers, which is awesome. And so it looks like most all of us either directly work in classrooms or kind of indirectly impact what's going on in classrooms. And so it's nice to meet you all. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to be posing some questions here and there. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question or if you want to share something that you think is relevant or meaningful to the conversation. Like I said, I'm just going to be asking some questions here and there. I would love for you to either turn on your mic in your video or feel free to add different notes in the chat, and Thea will be able to keep me posted on things that are going in the chat. So just a little bit about me. My name is Brad. My role is a Director of Technology and Innovation at the Langley School. And the Langley School is in McLean, Virginia. I've been here for 9 years, but I started my background as a middle school math and science teacher. And my background is in STEM education. So I'd be happy to connect with you and stay connected afterwards. I love expanding my knowledge base and just meeting new people and learning from them. So I'm pretty active on social media. Would be happy to connect with you afterwards. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Lands, or check out my website at uplearnllc.com. And I'd like to start off with this this idea that I had back probably back when COVID started. I had this idea that I wanted to try to make an impact on educators just because I'm so passionate like all of you. I wanted to do something to help inspire teachers to stay in the field during COVID. And I also wanted to provide, just some structure, guidance, and resources that I've learned over my course of education in the last 15 years. And so I decided I wanted to try to write a book. I had no idea how to write a book. I didn't know where to begin. My background wasn't in language arts. I was in math and science. And so I decided my passion project during COVID, when I had some extra time, was to work on a book that I was really passionate about. And so I do a lot of project-based learning in my classes, and I've talked a lot about project-based learning. And I thought I would take my own advice on becoming a lifelong learner by doing what I tell my students to do. Start off with a driving question. And so when we leverage inquiry, I always try to have my students ask a driving question, and it takes a little while to get there. There's some massaging that goes on. There's some refining and editing, even combining other questions to come into one. And I'll share some of those strategies that I've learned over the course of my teaching career with you. Hopefully, you'll be able to use those to help stimulate curiosity with your students in your classroom. But this is the question that I came up with and decided on in order to try to make a positive impact in the education community. I asked myself, how might I intentionally model the learning process in order to successfully write and publish a book that positively impacts the broader education community? And so this went through several iterations, but this is the final one that I landed on. And this is the question that really drove my inquiry and had me go through my passion project all the way to an action item. And I think having an action item is really critical as a part of your driving question. Again, we're going to unpack a lot of this, and we're going to talk about how technology can integrate into the success of your plan. But I just wanted to model and show you what my driving question was to really help stimulate my learning and professional growth. And so this is my book that I came out with, Knowledge Able. And what I'm going to talk about is what I call the ABLE cycle. I created an acronym that really focuses on using technology and inquiry to help students become better learners. I focus on the idea that most of us in education today are really focused on knowledge or students becoming knowledgeable, right? We're really focused on the content. You think about the SOLs, you think about, Common Core learning standards. We're really focused on content. We are content driven. And what I wanted to do was really expand the box and think and shift about how we can help students focus on those skills that will allow them to become knowledgeable in the future. And I call this idea knowledge able. It's thinking about the skills that will allow students to be able to become lifelong learners, allowing them to think critically, ask big questions, using social and emotional learning to be able to work with other people and learn more about themselves as learners so that they can hopefully accomplish any task and really succeed in any environment. And so I'm going to unpack some of those ideas in this presentation. And so part of my book, I said, is the knowledge able part, right? ABLE. And I came up with a hopefully easy to remember acronym, the ABLE cycle, which starts off with first A, ask a question. And then B, believe in yourself, which really gets to a lot of the social emotional learning elements. L, leverage resources, which really integrates a lot of technology and other strategies and tools, devices, and resources. And then finally, E, execute the task, which also is the action part of this. Just kind of thinking about that as a cycle, right? We know that when we ask more questions, we naturally learn more. And as we learn more, we have more questions. And so I believe this is a cycle that can fuel us for more curiosity and more learning and growth. And what we're going to do is kind of unpack each of these letters and really explore what it looks like to go through this process as a learner. And so unpacking this a little bit more, we start with ask a question. And this is where we craft our driving question, right? And so this is arguably the hardest part because it really carries you throughout the entire project or the entire learning goal. And so working with students to help them become better at asking questions is really challenging. And so I'm going to teach you, or at least share with you, some things that I've learned from other resources that have helped me be able to implement with my students in the classroom. And so we're going to look at how to craft and then refine a driving question. Then we're going to take a look at B, believe in yourself, identifying needs to help you build your own confidence, learning more about yourself as a learner, and then also learning how to use those other 4 C's that we talk about a lot, the collaboration, the communication elements, those parts to help you be more successful at communicating your ideas and also working with others. The L is really where we get more into technology for leveraging resources. It's what tools, people, strategies, materials are you going to need in order to answer that driving question, solve that problem, or really complete your learning goal. And so we're going to take a look at some different ways in which we can do that with technology as well as other resources. And then finally, looking at executing the task. There are lots of different ways that you can go about answering a question or solving a problem. So thinking about how you want your students to be organized or grouped, or even thinking about the logistics of a project that they're working on can be really helpful in having them execute their learning task. And so putting these pieces all together really creates that cycle that hopefully will continue to stimulate curiosity and promote growth. And I came up with this idea that I really find interesting. It's, if you look at this axis, right? If you look at curiosity and courage, I think these are two really important elements to learning. And I feel like our goal is in the first quadrant at the top right, which I call audacious exploration. We want our students to be courageous in taking learning risks, but we also want them to be highly curious. And you see in the other quadrants, if they're lacking in any of these two particular categories, they don't become as efficient or as effective in the learning process. We have other categories such as vigilant inquiry, apathetic trepidation, and then reckless indifference. But our goal is to get students to build their capacity and their competence, right? So it's their competence and their confidence. We want them to be courageous and we want them to be curious. And hopefully I'll share some different strategies on how we can help our students do that. And kind of taking a look at this a little bit closer, if we were to think about climbing a mountain, right? This is like a slope, essentially. We would want this to be kind of a perfect slope in between curiosity and courage. If curiosity is too high with low courage, then we don't really get anywhere. We're curious, but we're not willing to take those next steps. And if we're really courageous and not curious, well, then that can sometimes be disastrous because we're kind of going into a particular learning goal blind. We're just aimlessly going around, having the courage to do something, but it's really risky because we don't really have any direction guiding us. And so I feel like optimal learning is when we can leverage both of these successfully. And so we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these parts of the ABLE cycle. And the first is going to start with asking a question. And we're going to do a little activity first. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas. Either feel free to drop them in the chat or feel free to turn on your mic. I'm showing you a picture right now, and the goal is for me to stimulate your curiosity. My hope is that you haven't seen this image before and you're not really sure what it is. And so with my teacher hat on, I would present an image or a video or some type of prompt to my students to first stimulate curiosity. And then I would say, write as many questions as you can about this photo or this image or this video, right? Or this audio clip or this artifact, whatever it is that you want to do to use as a prompt to stimulate curiosity. And then you give them some time. So I'd like to have you be the students right now, and I'd love for you to drop in the chat any questions you have about this photo. What questions do you have about this photo? Ooh, what are they trying to turn on? What are the women reading, or what is the woman reading? Is it instructions? Great questions. What is that machine, or even is it a machine? What are they connecting? These are great. What other questions do you have? Feel free to ask more than one. Why is the picture black and white? It's a good observation. What is the machine? What are they connecting? Why is the picture black and white? Are they trying to turn something on? These are great. And so normally I would give students a lot more time than this, but I'm going to quickly go through this process just for the sake of time. And so after students ask all these questions, I would have them go back and I would have them refine their questions, change any statements into questions, and really try to make their questions stronger. Ooh, why are some things plugged in and others are not? Great, these are awesome questions. So now I'm going to shift your thinking a little bit. Now I want you to think about, what is this situation? What do you think is actually going on in the picture? And this is a slightly different question because the first one was completely open-ended. Any question that pops into your mind. Now this one's a little bit more targeted. What do you actually think is going on in the picture? What is this a snapshot of? Ooh, good question. Is this related to phones? Or computers? What other thoughts do you have? And this is a safe learning environment where all questions and comments are welcome. Is it their first time doing this? Another great question. I'll give you about 10 more seconds. Wondering what she is doing. Wonder what she is going to do with the extra wire she's holding. Is the woman stand-in training the woman who is kneeling? Wow. These are awesome questions. Okay, so hopefully I've hooked you a little bit. Hopefully I've stimulated your curiosity to the point to where you're interested now in the lesson, right? Let's say I'm the teacher. And so I wouldn't normally do this, but I'm going to give you a spoiler alert because we're all, in the education profession, and I'm using this as an example to talk about a teaching strategy. And so I chose this photo because A, I anticipated that most of us would probably work in the field of technology. And B, I also thought that most people probably don't know what this photo is or have even any background knowledge on it. And this photo is actually a photo of the ENIAC computer. And the ENIAC computer is the first machine that was actually a functioning computer during World War II. And you're looking at the very first programmers. The very first programmers of a computer were actually women. And for a long time, our government did not want people to know that for whatever reasons, right? And so recently, this started to become mainstream and people started learning more about this. There was even a documentary about this. If you were to Google it, there are a lot more photos that are out there now. And, it's becoming more well known. But still, clearly, many people don't necessarily know about it. And so ENIAC, I'm just going to type it in the chat if you wanted to look it up. This was the first ENIAC computer. Again, it was during World War II, and women were hired to be programmers. And so most people look at this and they think it's like an operator using telephone switches or something, it does look like that. But it's actually the very first computer in the world, which was the size of a huge room. And so if we were in a social studies classroom, this would be an amazing connection, right? We learn about World War II. We learn about the role of women that they played in World War II. We talk about a connection with technology and computers, right? This could also be a technology integration class where you're learning more about the history of computers and how computers function and work and how they've evolved, right? It could also be a math lesson. You could go lots of different ways with this. And so just having this pique students' interest will hopefully allow them to be able to take this learning journey and run with it. And what's powerful about having students ask questions is that they own the learning. They own the question. If I were to just tell you the question that I wanted you to answer, you wouldn't have as much natural curiosity, and you wouldn't have as much, I would say, intrinsic motivation to find the answer, because it's not your question. It was my question that I projected on you. And so while it's really hard, because we do have to cover a lot of material, we have to have students learn a lot, in order to pass the SOL tests. But if you can find time to give up a little control and allow students to ask questions, or even what I like to do, have students come up with essential questions. For those of you that are familiar with understanding by design, it's kind of a framework that is used to do backwards planning. And part of it is called essential questions. And typically, teachers are the ones that come up with the essential questions for that particular unit based on standards and objectives. But if you can kind of trick students to have them be the ones that come up with the essential questions, they are now intrinsically motivated because they're their questions. And so if you could kind of guide and shift to kind of get them to land on those essential questions, but really make them think that they came up with them, it has a lot of natural buy-in, and it sustains their interest in the unit or the activity or lesson. And so I found this to be really, really effective. So I hope you found that to be fun. I'd like to share a little bit more about the actual process of asking questions and then refining them. And so in my research, I came across what's called the question formulation technique. And this is by Right Question Institute, who came up with this. And they actually, the founders created a book called Make Just One Change, where they talk about this in detail. And in the book and on their website, they share what they call the question formulation technique, or in short, the QFT. And here they share the QFT criteria. which is designing a question focus for the student. In this case, it would be the topic that I shared with you, right? I could be like, I want you all to learn more about World War II. And I decided to throw up a photo that you could ask questions about in order to unpack and dig deeper, right? So whatever subject you're in, it's totally applicable. You just have to figure out what the unit topic is or what the lesson is that you want students to learn. And then you have students use what they call the rules for producing questions, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. And then after they go through this process, they prioritize their top 3 questions, and then they report their top 3 questions. And from there, they have to whittle down to a final driving question. And so the next part is looking at what the students will be able to do. They'll be able to produce their own questions. They'll be able to improve their questions, strategize on how they use their questions, and then finally reflect on their questions. And then these are the rules for students. This is the actual process that students go through. They first ask as many questions as they can. They don't stop, judge, discuss, talk with anybody else. This is silent thinking time. It's hard for students. This is a really, really challenging part. And it'll take a couple tries before you actually get this down. Usually it takes about the 3rd go around with my students where they really get it and they're really invested. But this is a totally different style that most students are not used to. So it takes a little while to get them comfortable with it. Then afterwards, they write down all their questions exactly as they had them in their head. The whole idea is just to do a brain dump. It's to get whatever's inside their head onto the paper or onto a computer, whatever it is. We just want to get whatever's inside their head, out and about. And then finally, they change any statements into questions. And then from there, they go and they prioritize their questions. They categorize their questions. They try to change any closed-ended questions to open-ended questions to allow for more learning. And then they try to refine and revise and really strengthen their question to come up with one driving question. Okay. And so hopefully that's a strategy that you might be willing to try or even teach other teachers about, to help students become more curious and become inquirers about some of the information that's taught. Any questions or comments about the question formulation technique? I'd be happy to take any questions or comments. Okay, I'll keep moving on. So the second part is believing in yourself. And really, if you ask a question and you want to learn something, but you feel like you don't have the capacity, or you're not smart enough, or you don't have the abilities to get it done, then chances are you're probably not going to get it done. And I know a lot of students in classes lack self-confidence for whatever reason. Sometimes they lack their abilities, or even their self-esteem, or even what they think about themselves. And so, being the teacher or whatever your role is, supporting students obviously can be really helpful in helping them to build their capacity, build their skills, and then build their self-esteem so that they, are excited and confident in their abilities to be able to tackle complex problems or even answer tough questions. So thinking about helping students with confidence. In my research, I came across this idea called the learning quotient. Most of us has heard of IQ, right? Most of us have heard of EQ, which is, the emotional quotient. It's where we get social emotional learning, right? And then there's this thing called the learning quotient. And it really is aimed to think about and reflect and maybe even assess one's learnability. And one's learnability really combines their IQ and their EQ. Because learning, as we know, is messy, right? It involves emotions, it involves courage, it involves all kinds of things. And so trying to think about different ways that we can enhance our students' learning quotient can be helpful. And by focusing on the EQ or the emotional quotient, focusing on those elements can ultimately lead to a higher learning quotient or LQ. And so when you think about this as a triple Venn diagram, in the middle, right, they can all develop over time. It's not static. We can grow in all these areas. We can likely help others to achieve goals, and then they're used to solve problems, right? And if you think about other similarities, you can see that LQ and EQ require social emotional thinking, develop confidence. And on the other side with LQ and IQ, they require cognitive and logical thinking and develop competence. And so this is just kind of setting the stage and kind of like the why or the need behind helping students develop those social emotional learning skills. And so if you think about moving from where we were to now, you can think of this flow chart. Did you ask a question? Yep. Do you believe in your ability to answer the question? No, or I'm not sure. Probably not quite ready to master that task yet, right? And so going back and really thinking about different strategies we can do to build that confidence. And here's another idea, thinking about the elements of social emotional learning. If you were to have the idea of growth mindset from Carol Dweck and the idea of fixed mindset versus the idea of quit and grit from Angela Duckworth, right? We want to try to get into this idea of persistent improvement, again, which is at the top right. Persistent improvement, whereas we have a growth mindset and we work hard, right? We don't give up easily. We're willing to stay with the problem longer. We're motivated. We're intrinsically motivated, and we want to see things all the way out. And so helping students get to that point can be really helpful. And so the question is really, how do we do that? And again, in my research, I found this thing called the zone of proximal development, which is something that if we all kind of went to education, it's pretty standard to learn about the zone of proximal development. Maybe it's been a while since you've heard of it, or maybe you haven't learned about it. I learned about it when I was in college, getting my education degree. And so this kind of breaks it down a little bit. It's really thinking about what the learner can't do yet, right? And then the middle, like the gray area, is what the learner can do with scaffolding. This is help from the teacher. Right. And then finally, you want them to be able to grow independently so that they can do that task on their own. And that's why teachers are so important, right? We need them to help scaffold students, to support them, and to really know their students well so that they can help support their individual and unique needs and challenges, and even help them uncover their strengths and their interests. And so really supporting students, helping them, knowing when to provide assistance and knowing when to step back, that is going to really help students be able to build their confidence. And so thinking about how you can either choose to be helpful or maybe remove yourself. Sometimes it can be helpful to what I call be less helpful. Sometimes students are so dependent on teachers that, removing some of those scaffolding or even stepping away a little bit, allowing them to have that productive struggle can really help them become more independent learners. And so thinking about all the different ways that you do that in your classrooms or with colleagues, can be helpful. Okay, here's where we get really into the technology portion along with other resources. And so how do we utilize tools, people, strategies, materials, really all kinds of resources to help us ask or answer a question, and then finally to maybe even solve a problem? And so thinking about materials, resources, this is one of my favorite places that I visited. This was a school in Miami-Dade in Florida, and they had like this makerspace that was turned into a library. The other side of this was an actual library. And so they had this giant open room where they had tons of materials that were labeled. They had all kinds of technology. They had screens up. They had small collaboration stations, right? And while maybe some of us don't have these rooms or these spaces in our schools, we can use this idea to think about finding the best tool for the job. And the more access we have to these different tools, the better we're able to find the right fit. And so thinking about what's the best tool for the job, whether it's digital or whether it's physical, can be helpful. Right. And then thinking about those digital tools, are you leveraging any learning management systems? Is there an online application? Is there a downloadable software application that could be helpful? Is it better to use a phone or a computer or maybe even a tablet? Thinking about the best tool for the job can be really helpful as you begin to answer your question. And then finally, people, right? Might you be able to reach out to an expert in the field? Can you collaborate with students? Who in your current building or your school community can you reach out to help you with this process? Do you need a mentor? All kinds of questions to rely on people can be helpful in helping you answer that question or solve that problem. And then looking from a strategy standpoint, this is a little bit older information, but it's still really helpful and relevant today. Helping students think about thinking routines can really help them process and really organize their thinking in different ways. Some people like to doodle. They like to, draw graphs. Some people are more visual learners. Some people like to take notes. All of these different strategies can be helpful. And you can use this on paper. You can use this in technology. You can create templates for students to use, or they can maybe even create their own graphic organizer to help them process and think about things differently. And so providing those different levels of structure is really helpful. From a technology standpoint, I really like using what is it? Lucid Chart. Lucid Chart is a really good one that I like for, different graphings and different graphic organizers or charts. They have a pretty robust free option without paying for it that you can use. But there are all kinds of learning tools out there that allow you to create different charts and graphs. Even Google Drawings at its most basic level can be really helpful. And then as we start thinking about, integration of artificial intelligence, which is super popular right now, thinking about the blend between relationships and robots, right? Going back to the believe in yourself and kind of leveraging that with different resources and technology. In the middle, they both help transform student learning. They help motivate students and provide individualized instruction. Think about what tools you currently have access to that are more artificial intelligence centered. Think about all the different literacy or math apps that your students probably use that have machine learning built into it, where the students enter information, the computer receives that information, gives them targeted feedback, and then will make decisions based on the students' responses. Right. This happens a lot in tools that we use and applications for students to enhance their proficiency, in math and literacy. And so I know these are really popular tools these days, but even going the next step further, right? Talking about ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence applications that are out there, how we can leverage this technology purposefully, responsibly, and safely, honestly, and thinking about, how we can introduce those topics and ideas to students to help them be able to answer their question or even solve their problem. I recently attended a webinar with the Siena School, which is in this area, and it was all on AI and ChatGPT. And there was one particular slide, or two slides really, that really resonated with me. And so I wanted to share this with you. Thinking about ethical use in terms of like academic integrity with technology, these are some good questions to ask. Whether or not to allow students to use artificial intelligence or to use a particular technology device that could aid or assist them in helping them solve the problem or answer their question. So these are some good questions that I found to be really interesting. What is the core learning objective for the assignment or assessment? So thinking about, does this tool help the student to achieve that learning objective? Does the tool completely accomplish the core learning objective? Does it completely do it for them? Or is there some learning where the students will have to do some work with the tool? How well do students need to master this objective to enable further learning? This one really blew my mind. Such a great question to ask. If you think about a calculator, thinking about this, how well do students need to master this objective? Maybe it's learning all of the operations in math, right? Multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. How important is it for students to master this to enable further learning, right? At earlier ages, it's really important for them to be able to master this. So maybe allowing them to use a technology in earlier grades might not be the best fit. But after students have mastered the standard operations in math, it might make sense to allow them to use a calculator because they have the foundation, and now they're just using a calculator to save time to do higher order thinking or more complex math problems. The next one, will students need to be able to know or do this unaided in the future? And while we have no idea, we can try to anticipate the near future. And so thinking about if this tool will interfere too much with students needing to be able to use this unassisted or unaided. And then finally, are the students entitled to additional supports? Thinking about, are they allowed to use outside devices? A lot of people think about this as open textbook tests or quizzes, right? Just thinking about all the different things that we use in our world today. Is it considered cheating or is it resourceful, right? If we think about today, we all use everything we can get to be resourceful. And so I think it's interesting trying to balance that in schools where we want to teach students to give credit and to be ethical, but also teach them to be resourceful because they're going to end up being resourceful in the real world outside of school. And then here's a little chart for us to think about when you're using technology tools to help you answer that question or solve that problem. Think about how authentic the assignment is and how authentic the product is that students are creating. And then think about how much technology is actually being used. And so this is an interesting graph that will allow teachers and students to really think about, is this tool necessary to use in the classroom based on these criteria? So we like to see high authenticity, right? We want it to be student created. We want it to be student produced. And the level of technology can fluctuate, right? This might be a really low tech skill, like using a Google Doc for substitution to a piece of paper, or it might be really high technology, maybe using the SAMR model that completely redefines the entire assignment or the learning. But we really want to see authenticity high, because when authenticity is low, that's where you start getting into muddy waters, like there might be plagiarism involved, or there might be cheating, or this really doesn't accurately represent the student learning and understanding. And so thinking about whatever project, assignment, task you're giving to your students, trying to maximize the authenticity when having conversations and thoughts about how to integrate meaningful technology. And then as students resource and research, I came up with this acronym that I've gotten really good feedback on. I wanted an easy acronym for people to remember how to become really ethical researchers in today's world. And so I created what I call the credible source. And this credible template goes through and it's like a checklist of making sure that you're looking at different sources on the internet, or it even could be in print, but it's mainly designed for the internet, to help you realize if this is a credible source or not. Trying to be as objective as possible, not have any bias. And so as you're going down and looking, right, it's currency, reliability, ethical, diverse, intention, bias, license, and extension. And this is just a good reminder to help students. And you could even tailor it towards younger students or modify the language to help with this. And then finally, execute the task. This is where we take action and reflect on the process, right? And so executing is really putting everything into motion. It's making that first step in building something, or writing that first letter or that first word. It's really putting the plan into motion. And so as you think about helping students get there, whatever they build, whether it's a project, if it's something digital, if they're making a video, whatever their project is, you can think about the type of structure you want to provide them with inquiry. If you look at student inquiry versus student agency, they kind of have a natural positive relationship. And so the more student inquiry you get, usually the more student agency. So if you think about student agency, how much ownership do I have over my learning? Am I allowed to ask my question? Am I allowed to use any resource that I want? Am I allowed to use any strategies that might help me as an independent learner, right? All of these are adjustable and they're not good or bad. Usually with new students in the beginning of the school year, I like to start off with structured inquiry and giving them very little choice, because I like to provide that structure so that they begin learning the process more of becoming a better learner. As they start to gain their confidence in these different skills, then you start loosening up the control a little bit and making it more flexible. Maybe, you give them a lot of structure regarding the questions. Maybe you assign questions to them, but you allow them to use different resources. Or maybe you allow them to choose, how they choose to demonstrate their learning and understanding about their final product for a particular assignment. Or maybe you switch it. Maybe you say, you know what, I'm going to allow you to ask your own questions, but you have to do this project and it has to be in this particular artifact. Like everybody has to create a video or everybody has to create a presentation, right? You can choose where you want to be loose and where you want to be tight on strategically to help, your students master these different skills. And these are some different things that you can consider in the classroom. These are different spaces that you can use to really stimulate thinking and thinking about, what type of learning is going on in these spaces. So having a wonder wall or a question corner to spark curiosity. Maybe you want students to collaborate or storytell with a campfire circle. Maybe a novelty nook where they're imaginative and they want to try to use their creativity. Maybe they want a little reading counter or a cafe counter where they can, be like they're in a cafe and just kind of think and type and, write. Or maybe you have a small area where there's a studio involved where students can do video and audio projects where they need a quiet space where they can do their recording and editing. So just kind of thinking about these things, different spaces to help students really leverage the type of thinking that will help them complete whatever task they're in. And then this is fun too. I read this in a book. It's called Event to Learn. ISTE came out with this quite a few years ago. in the maker age now, we really think about three things that are super important in terms of students being able to build different skills that will help them in the future, and also makes it super fun. And so having students be able to investigate and explore, having them be able to make and tinker, and then finally trying to implement some sort of game involved. Learning doesn't have to be boring, right? Learning can be fun. And having these three things at the bottom can really help students be motivated to want to learn and also help them learn in the process. And so this is just something that I try to think about. You know, if I were to be a student in my class, you know, would I want to be here? Would I be having fun? And if the answer is no, you know, maybe try to switch something up. Maybe try to do things a little bit differently. That's something that I always like to ask myself. Would I want to be a student in my own class right now? And if you can answer that yes every single day, I'm sure your students would too. Okay, and this is just kind of following up, just regrounding in the ABLE cycle, asking a question, believing in yourself, leveraging resources, and then executing the task. And while I didn't necessarily intentionally provide you with specific strategies or specific resources or specific tools, there's so many out there that you know about and ones that you use in your school. I really wanted to hopefully stimulate your thinking in these areas to where you can maybe be a little bit more strategic in helping your students become a better learner and thinking about how you can leverage the resources that you already have, or maybe tweak things to do something a little bit differently to take learning to the next level. And these are my references. I'll be happy to share the slide deck with you, after this event so that you can access it and use. I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate you being here today. This is a great format. Thank you, Thea, for helping to moderate, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.